Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition for the week. I'm Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen.
You want to hit us with your quote?
Little quote action. Hypotheses are nets. Only he who casts will catch. And that's Novalis, quoted in Toyota Kata. I was reading a bit about Novalis on the way here, and apparently he from the 16th century and has all these pithy quotes, which I thought was kind of funny. But yeah, I kind of like it for a couple reasons. One is I think only he who casts will catch. It's kind of like a recognition that, like, you know, thinking only gets you so far. You kind of have to be trying things and doing things to, I don't know, do a thing. The other is the word hypothesis rather than idea. I feel like more people, including myself, like, I think it might be best to use that word in brainstorming and stuff, because it's like having an idea kind of sounds like you have ownership over it, and like it's a thing that maybe is like it's a good idea or it's a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Whereas a hypothesis is very much about like
neutral value judgment.
Yeah, it's just like it might be this. Now we test it, right? And either it is or it isn't.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, kind
of. Yeah, I like it too, because I can't remember if we've talked about this on the podcast much, but when I was doing more like design build kind of stuff,
yeah,
or whether that was for a customer or complex fixtures or whatever, I'd often get into this space where I was kind of paralyzed by the number of variables and choices. And I've talked about this a lot with my wife, who runs a farm, and which is a very complex system. And sometimes it's be like, where do you start? And I've often found that you just have to start on a thing and establish a direction and see if it's okay. And if it works, fantastic. And if it doesn't, you've ruled it out. But yeah, there's this like point often where you're sort of like caught in limbo. It's like analysis paralysis. And so I think this really kind of, it's a little bit to the side of this quote, but you have to just try something and
Agreed.
Go forward and see if it works or not.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think it's good to remember that doesn't just apply to prototyping type work. Like, that is across the board in complex systems. Sometimes if you don't, like, there is just many situations where one person can't do all the planning. Like, it's too complex. You can't hold it all in your head. You have to like break it down. Yeah. And sometimes that involves testing a little piece because of all of the other dependencies down the line.
Right. Yeah. I often think like in coming up with some new idea after thinking about it for a long time, I sort of feel like eventually like sort of a crux comes up, or like you kind of identify this one thing that like is a big assumption. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, not great. Yeah. And often like jumping into that as a first thing to test. I've sort of been looking around and thinking about, I feel like it's really easy to go look at all these different products that are available on the market, whether that's digital services or like you go and stay at a hotel and the service is weird, or, or like products that are just built poorly or something. And the funny thing is, I think it's really easy to look at those and sort of be like, wow, why aren't they doing it better? But the fact is, as evidenced by the fact that you're interacting with that thing in the world,
yeah,
they actually delivered the value, right? Like, if someone makes a crappy bike and sells a whole bunch of them, they actually did a thing, including the selling, which is not easy.
Right.
And you are sitting there criticizing the way they did it, having not done a thing. And not to say that it's just better to have done something than not done something, but that is to say that, like, as a customer, actually a crappy bike is way better than no bike at all.
Yeah.
Or like going to a hotel. We just stayed at a hotel on a little family vacation. And like there are a lot of little things, but meanwhile, like they're running a hotel. I'm not running a hotel. So like they've done a lot more than me in terms of delivering that value to the customer, even if it's not perfect. And I just think like, I don't know. It's so much better to have a hotel that doesn't have like, it didn't have a single shelf in the room or a dresser. So all your stuff is just on the floor. And it's like, this feels like easy to fix. I don't know.
We're in this, I think, odd period of time too, where we have very high expectations for the quality of our services and goods. And simultaneously, there has been a degradation in quality of a lot of services and goods because people are like, the margins are getting slim. So people are, so it's like this weird thing where like our expectations are moving and floating, and the actual delivered quality is moving and floating, and it's hard to know like what's reasonable to expect and not, and also what's reasonable to try and deliver and not.
Yeah, but looking at the quote, like, go cast.
Right.
It like cracks me up when people.
Your hotel was like, well, maybe we won't buy dressers and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the general vibe there felt like they had bitten off maybe a bit more than they could chew, cash flow wise. I mean, it was very nice. I just think, like, I almost asked them about. I was kind of curious. Like, it seemed like they should maybe close down some of the rooms and really focus on delivering the value at the other rooms or something. Like, it was perfectly pleasant. It just had the like spread too thin kind of vibe, and
but not a budget hotel.
No, it was
maybe
exactly.
They were just really into like the Nordic aesthetic
of all your stuff on the floor. Yeah.
No, you don't have stuff.
Yeah, there you go. That was my problem.
What's wrong with you?
It also really drove home the need to experience our own services and how hard that is to do and rare. I would bet money that no one who's putting together that hotel is staying there with like a real like pack up from home, go to the hotel, unpack, stay a few nights. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure someone walked in and go and is like, oh yeah, it's nice. Yeah. For me, like, we got an email recently from someone that was like, hey, on your checkout page, like, your logo has a white background and your checkout page has a gray background. So now it has this weird white rectangle around it. And they were like, you might want to just upload something that matches the background, or like a, what's it called, file with a transparent background. Yeah. And it's like, and the issue is there. I mean, obviously it's the logo, but the real problem is I don't buy my buckles frequently through my website. Yeah. And and even if I do, I don't have all the questions in my head that an average purchaser might, right? So it's like, we get the question, is this sold as a set or as a single, right? Yeah. It's like, I know, so I'm not going to have that question.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, I had a similar thing yesterday. Somebody wrote in and said, hey, the link to your Instagram on your website's broken.
Interesting.
Similarly, that's nothing I would ever check unless I was like doing maintenance purposefully and like being like, I'm going to check every link on this website. Right. I also was thinking yesterday about how, like, just in terms of like using your own services, it's really easy as a producer to start to become kind of like myopic to your own sort of like production, to think of your production sort of as its own sort of organism and not remember that. And like in terms of like quality and lead time and sort of being like, well, this is now a small job for us, so maybe we're not going to like give it quite the attention we would have 2 years ago or something, and just be like, no, you have to like give it the attention that it's due for the customer. Yeah. Not scale it based on like your internal sort of priorities and stuff and internal value judgments on what the job or the part is.
For sure.
And I think I think a lot of shops do, and it's very easy to sort of like just kind of put everything in perspective of your own sort of problems, your own challenges, and forget about the fact that you're one small organism within this much bigger system.
Yeah. It's like when people tell you a lead time or something that is completely unworkable, and they're like, well, we have good reasons for it. And it's kind of like, well, I actually don't care about the reasons. Like, I'm going somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of this, I think, I think something that's really cool about Toyota production system and lean in general is there's a huge emphasis on the customer and like, are you flowing value to the customer, and value add and non-value add? That is all from the perspective of the customer. And I think it's really cool. It's challenging, but it's really cool to maintain that. I saw a shop tour. I forget which shop it was. It was a video on YouTube, and they had, at every station, they had a sign that said who their customer is and who their suppliers are. And sometimes the customer is your accounting department. Sometimes the customer is your milling department and you run a saw. But like really maintaining that focus of like, who is my customer and who are my suppliers. I thought that was cool. Also with internal stuff, it's funny, like if some of your internal operations were an outside vendor, you'd fire them. Right? But because they're internal, you like accept all these challenges.
Right.
It's like, oh, well, we ran out of coolant, or we didn't have anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's delayed, and that's acceptable.
Yeah, because you understand and feel like tied to those challenges or constraints. You accept them. Yeah, totally. Anyway,
I have a few things I've been thinking on. The first is I was in the airport, and there's a big line for the ladies' room and no line at all for the men's room. And I was contemplating sort of like setup time versus versus like process time. And it's fun. It's such a good demonstration of, because most people, when they're improving processes, they focus on the actual thing that's happening and making that faster. And it's actually like, it's very clear from that example that setup time is, in that case, I mean, basically that, like, looking at the actual process is typically the wrong place to look for the most improvement. Anyway, so that was funny. I was thinking of...
Hopefully we don't need to spell that out for everybody.
I mean,
if it's not obvious, look it up.
So the other piece I've been thinking a lot about is overproduction. Basically, anyway, it's like said to be the source of all waste, and I feel like it's the most sort of mind-bending one when I got into it, certainly. But even as I continue, like, the wastes are pretty hidden, I think. But just looking around in the shop and just like really taking it in that, probably 85% of everything we do is non-value add, at least. And just thinking about where that's coming from, and like overproduction accounts for, like, anytime you put something down and pick it back up, that's basically it was produced before it was needed. Otherwise you would have just picked it up off of the previous process to put it into the next process.
Sure.
And like all of that sorting and counting and putting it away and getting it back out and all that stuff, I think the problem is it's not clear that the problem there is due to overproduction. So it's not like attributed to that in my head. And so when you're solving those problems, like, I don't know, you don't walk around the shop going like, wow, we made too much stuff, right? And like recently we started producing a new part, and it was kind of like, all right, it's running well, let's just make a bunch of inventory. And we sort of had to, it's so hard,
tamp it down.
Just go like, no, we're not making more until we actually need more from the next department, not in general, right? Like in our case, the paint department hadn't painted what we had already made. So it's like, well, we don't need more. And in that case, it was due to, like, it was a new part. So I just, the risk of defects
extremely high.
Is high. not realizing something, even if it's aesthetic or something.
Yeah.
You get it all the way through and you see some little blemish or something you're not happy with.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty common. So, yeah, I've just been seeing it more and more in our shop. And that can even be like digital files or anything where you sort of take the time to make a folder and put them away. And then a week later, you're like, oh, where was that document? Let me go find it. And it takes you 3 minutes to go find it.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't need it, clearly. And so it would be best if you produced the document, sent it to where it's needed, and then filed it. And that was the end of it. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of things that, the source of them is basically overproduction, but I think it's hard to attribute the challenges and the wastes to just making too much stuff, because is that not?
Oh, I'm just thinking there's kind of a fuzzy line on this overproduction and overprocessing. Like, you can attribute a fair amount of overprocessing to like root cause analysis to overproduction.
Yeah.
But even I was just thinking about where I'm finding friction lately. There's a lot of overprocessing that's just due to bad process too. And
yeah.
So I think it's interesting trying to pick apart kind of what the root cause is in some of those instances. It's like if you're counting, yeah, that's probably due to overproduction or some other, but it can be just about like you should have something built into the process that counts if you have to do batch work for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I don't know. I was just kind of,
yeah.
You saw my funny face over here.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's obviously not all overproduction.
Yeah.
This is actually a funny one. I was thinking about our paint department specifically.
Uh-huh.
And like Eliyahu Goldratt theory of constraints suggests that you should identify your bottleneck and then I forget the verbiage he uses, exploit, but then subjugate all other processes to that process. In our case, my time is still the bottleneck.
Uh-huh.
And the paint department is way more efficient if we do much bigger batches. Because like mixing the paint, cleaning out the gun between things.
Right.
Yes, those can all be improved for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is at this very moment, it just takes a lot longer to paint like 5 colors than just to paint one color. So I was kind of wondering about that. Like, should we just increase our batch sizes? It doesn't have to be drastically, but should we be optimizing for that bottleneck right now, especially because the increased inventory there in terms of a cash flow challenge, like it's not, the numbers we're talking about are totally workable.
It's not paying you more, and the paint is already paid for, and the product is effectively saleable at that point.
It's saleable. Whether it will sell or not,
Sure.
Obviously, that's sort of the risk of overproduction, and that's why a lot of people put stuff on sale.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, we've made too much of this, and it's not selling as well as we thought. We'll put it on sale and pretend that it's for...
I guess what I meant by that was like, at least at that point, you have... Well, I guess you could cut this both ways, actually. I was going to say, at least at that point, you're not investing a bunch of time into something that's half done. You are...
Right.
It is... But on the other hand, like, that means you've invested the maximum amount of time into this product. But...
Also, is done sitting on a shelf or is done delivered to the customer?
Right. Yeah. Oh. Anyway, I do think we had I had mentioned a while back doing this like monthly meeting with our crew to go over. We're reading, very, very slowly, the Toyota Way.
Oh, cool.
It didn't happen for quite a few months due to illness, vacation, all kinds of little issues. So we finally had it again this last week. And with all things in this whole realm, it was, there's a lot of like paradoxical stuff. She kind of like, Ariel happened to have just read the portion on the gutter factory and like balancing production leveling versus single piece flow and not overproducing, which is kind of, what we're talking about here. And I do think it is really good to keep that in mind. And like, in your case, like lowering, not overproducing is really important. Also, you don't have but at the moment you don't have the levers to pull to like kind of solve that problem, i.e. like more labor.
Right.
So it probably does make sense to increase batch size in that because it will free up more overall labor across the entire, organization.
Yeah. And right now it's funny. We're struggling with, I think about this sometimes. If someone gave you like $1 million or like $50 million, could you actually deploy that capital effectively?
Yeah.
It's kind of a challenge.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to do it with the cash we have on hand.
Right.
I mean, I have a bunch of new products I want to release.
And it's not $50 million to anybody who's wondering.
Yeah. Important clarification. It's not 50 million, unfortunately. No. It's funny because like I was just thinking about hiring.
Yeah.
Again, and that's a project. So then I was kind of looking at my other projects and being like, which one am I kicking down the road?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like it's hard to deploy capital sometimes, and so freeing up man hours to deploy that capital to reinvest it in the business to achieve the goals we're trying to achieve might be the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this sort of gets back to the beginning of the episode.
Testing a hypothesis.
Well, just you were talking about like systems that are so complex that it's hard to figure out. I think it's sometimes easy to approach the Toyota production system as a list of rules.
Yeah.
It's like drive down your inventories, whatever, single piece flow is the best. And it's sort of, and then it's very disturbing every time you read like about that gutter company or some other thing where you're like, wait, I thought this whole time you were meant to do the opposite of this thing.
Uh-huh.
And it's sort of just that point of like, it is at the end of the day about like systems thinking and scientific thinking.
Yeah.
And the rest are just sort of results that have happened for Toyota.
Yeah.
That does not mean that they will happen for me. And it also doesn't mean that with a new reality, like that's over the last, 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like with the shifting technologies and whatnot, like all that has to be not revisited on a continuous basis. I mean, sort of, yes, but
mm-hmm.
it just means it's not necessarily the answer everywhere.
Yeah.
I was just reading Toyota Kata, and they mentioned Toyota exec touring some facility, and they were talking about how low their inventories were, and he got to some section and was like, this station needs more inventory. And they sort of were like, oh, you mean less inventory, like attributing it to his bad English.
Uh-huh.
And he's like, no, more inventory.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, process stability, like all this stuff is just really key. But,
yeah.
I was curious, you mentioned that like that you've been struggling to continue with
mm-hmm.
this stuff lately.
Yeah.
I was curious if you wanted to
dive into it a little bit. Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit at our little crew meeting as well. I think at the beginning of the year, we've talked about this a little bit when we were first diving into the podcast, and I was kind of first diving into this in a more serious way at the shop.
Yeah.
There was lots of really easy, low-hanging fruit to kind of tackle. And we had a bunch of our processes improved greatly. And then we got really, really busy and just kind of fell off. And then, mostly, not that we haven't been talking about it or thinking about it, but in terms of like daily improvements and putting time towards that on the daily. And then we were kind of into this like focusing on big picture problems phase, which was mostly on me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of felt like I've been in the trenches a bit for the past like 7 months.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we had a little talk with the crew, and it was good to kind of, I think there's this like idea that a lot of these improvements need to be physical. And I think that's kind of like where we started in our shop, was kind of like 3D printed doodads and like organizing, whatever, or organizing physical stuff, putting things in bins, throwing stuff away.
Right.
And it was good to have the discussion with them and be like, no, like, for example, with whatever packing slips, Ariel was talking about her packing slip process. And I was like, that would be a perfect place to make an improvement. And I just saw like the light bulb kind of go off, and like, it was clear that hadn't really been considered prior, that could be a place where we could be like doing these sorts of daily improvements. And those things are super key. So yeah, I think we're sort of, it's hard because we're now about to move our shop, and we're still sort of in this like big picture improvements phase, and the man hours are spread very thin at the moment. But we are going to make a renewed commitment to trying to do that on the daily. And when I brought back, somehow I think it hadn't really sunk home that a lot of companies do like an hour a day or half an hour a day. And they were like, what? How does that work? Because we had kind of started with like an hour, 1 day a week initially. And then, as soon as, I think it's kind of like those times kind of turned into like regular maintenance routines. Right. And I just think it's important to remember that all of this is an ongoing organic process that has to be revitalized and rethought.
100%.
So we are in that process right now of reestablishing what this means and reestablishing the focus. And I think that will be, an ongoing process forever.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Continuous, perhaps.
It's interesting. I think like something I've heard a number of times is basically that a lot of people get into lean when things are not going well. Right. And you sort of see why, because it's like, okay, we have a bunch of time. Like, I guess we'll try this. I think, and I've had the same struggle, like when things get really busy, it's very easy to just be like, all right, we gotta just make stuff.
Yeah.
Like that's what we're being paid to do. And I guess like a few things. One, that like if that's just how it is, that's kind of, not ideal, but fine. Like it's way better than not that, because it actually lets you deal with like having more, like it's such a nice way to make sure people have stuff to do, even
in the slow times.
Yeah. Like, so even there is that. I think also though, it really speaks to why most companies just don't ever get started.
Yeah.
It's like if you're a successful company and you always have stuff that's going to pay you tomorrow, it is so easy to just sort of chase that.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, but if I just do this job, we'll get paid. So why don't we just do the job? And I think, I don't know. It's hard. I mean, we've definitely, we aim for an hour a day. I can't think of the last time that really happened. Like it like there's days where we definitely do more than that. I think probably most days, but it's not like, okay, I'm just doing an improvement for this first hour.
Yeah.
Like it's so easy to get pulled into like, oh, well, I'll just get this process started, or I just remembered I hadn't sent an email I really have to send, so I'm going to jump into that.
I think a big part of it is also making it something that people feel not people, but like the people that you work with or work under you feel empowered to take on their own. Because I think for a while I was kind of like driving the process, and I've shifted my focus to big improvements on the sort of larger scale of the business.
Yeah.
Like I took a better part of a week to, update our trunnions and whole work holding system. Like if you spread that out over hours, I probably put in more than an hour a day for quite a while.
Right.
And, I'm focusing on moving shop and ERP, quote unquote. So I think I sort of got out of the driver's seat for the shop as a whole for small improvements and didn't really do a good job of handing off the torch to be like, you guys are still empowered to take time to do your own improvements in the processes that you deal with on the daily basis.
Interesting.
And I still don't quite know. I mean, aside from like telling everybody to stop working and go find something to fix, which maybe would be a good place to start. Just be like, figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty hands-off manager.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think sometimes it's hard for me to just tell people what to do. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure, like, sometimes like throwing people into the deep, depends on the person, but throwing someone into the deep end often is not very effective.
Right.
So that's been a question for me that is as yet very much unsolved. Probably will never be solved.
So I have 2 thoughts.
Yeah.
One, my feeling is, and I'm figuring this out for sure, so I might be wrong here, but I think people get a pretty good sense of what's important by kind of like what you're asking about.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I've definitely tried to make sure that like when I come back from time out of the shop, or just that a lot of the interactions are asking about process improvements rather than like, have we shipped this stuff? Are you on task? Are you like hitting the numbers we're trying to hit? Because I mean, I think people are just very good at assessing like what people want from them.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is just like what they're being asked about.
Yeah, I feel like I've not been very good at maintaining the vibe in the shop recently either. And
Interesting, yeah.
Partially due to, I think, probably just my own sort of stress level.
Totally.
Which is a bummer, but
yeah,
I guess a reality at times. Not what I want to create, though,
right. Yeah.
in the long run.
My other thought, just hearing you say that, I feel like I've had a very similar struggle with like big improvements and small improvements and system improvements and cleaning and maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
And it's making me think like, I think we're sort of reinventing the wheel here, probably, for sure. But that's like what this process has been about for me, for sure, is like you read a bunch of stuff, one piece of it clicks for you, the rest of it is interesting, but I think you start doing that, and then it's like...
That's what this process is for everybody, I think.
Yeah.
It's like, here's a wheel, go make your own.
And then you're like, oh, wow, I'm doing basically the same thing everyone else is.
Hey, spokes.
Yeah, right.
You guys thought of spokes too?
Yeah.
Incredible.
And so I wonder if saying like, let's do an hour of improvements, right? It's like, we do 15 minutes of a morning meeting and then like some like 3S'ing or 5S'ing depending on your organization. And so I just wonder if it's sort of time. I wonder if it would be helpful for us in the shop to break out what we're doing instead of just being like, it's an hour of like lean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, it's like, we're going to clean for 10 minutes. We're going to sort for, right? Like, because then the other thing is like those big improvements. Yeah, you've just had some major wins, it sounds like, on some big improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow those don't feel like the same muscle as noticing small things all the time and fixing them live.
They're not. Yeah.
Right? They're very different, and it's very hard to draw a line between them. It's hard to decide how much of each you should be doing.
Yeah.
I think they're all very impactful. Like, I don't think that I think the small improvements are extremely impactful and are what most people sort of neglect of like, oh, this thing keeps falling on the floor. Okay, let's make it not fall on the floor anymore. Yeah. At the same time, those big ones are also huge wins. I don't know. I don't know how to.
Yeah, I think also one thought I had while you were saying that is just that I think instead of just saying like, go fix things, like probing into what are the challenges people are facing, maybe on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And instead of like suggesting things that are challenging or just putting up the things that I notice that are challenging, and helping people to start identifying, maybe, not even focus on fixing stuff yet, but really just focus on identifying problems for a while.
And and noticing stuff that's annoying. Yeah. Stuff that...
And maybe that's where we even put that half an hour, is like just walking around and being like, okay, what can we fix even? You know, what are issues that we see in each of these stations? Like, I don't know, maybe like mini Kaizen events kind of, but like very, very scaled down really as just like working people into the process.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a number of people talk and shop tours and whatever about getting an organization to go in this direction, which is very hard. Like, we have a huge advantage of having started this when it was basically a one-man show. Yeah. Right. And that is just to focus, to make it actually, like, put your money where your mouth is about it being about improving their lives. Not their lives, maybe their work. Let's say, start there.
It's a chunk of your life. It's a good chunk of your life.
Yeah. And so, like, one company, the first step, or two companies I can think of, the first thing they did in the company was renovate the break room and make it really nice. Yeah. And it's like, this has nothing to do with production. Yeah. And it definitely sends the message of, like, we genuinely care about your well-being here and not just about how many dollars it results in today. Yeah. Like, yes, that is the large, like, 10-year, 50-year goal. Right, is building a viable business, but that is very much about developing people who see all this stuff and have the tools to refine it. Yeah. And I think, like, I've gotten the most traction, I think it is a very good entry point to basically say, like, what is annoying, like, just what's annoying to you? Like, what's the most annoying part of your job? Yeah. Okay, how can we make it less annoying?
Yeah, we've had that discussion. I think there's a real uphill battle that we will all be fighting, which is that, like, since preschool or kindergarten, pretty much all people have been trained to just accept the situation they're in as inchangeable and learn how to exist effectively within it. And I think different people take that to heart to a different degree, but it's sort of like a baseline that, like, if you've graduated high school, you've learned how to deal, right?
100%.
Yeah. And, I've seen that in my shop to various extents. And, like, one person did not do well in school. Okay. Excels at thinking outside the box.
Interesting.
And is constantly suggesting things that we could change. The other person is an exceptional student, not to take anything away from her. Oops, gave it away. Sorry. Amazing employee. Yeah. And by own admission, has a very, very hard time thinking about, like, restructuring a system from the ground up. Right. Like, by own admission, is just like, when something's awful, I just figure out how to work as well as possible within it. Right. I don't ever even contemplate that I could reform it in a way that works for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, right. And both are key to a business, is something I'm sort of seeing.
It's true. Yeah.
Because, like, I'm very much, and we had this conversation from, like, day one. I remember you were like, hey, I think maybe you just need to stand in front of the machine and make parts. Right. And I was like, well, what if I, get a gripper and do all this stuff? And, like, both are true, I think, is at the end of the day. Like with accounting, like, you got to do it. And yes, there's a lot of improvements to be made to the process. Like, one thing I really don't like about the, like, subcontractor model, especially with this kind of thing, is you get a bill and you basically pay the bill. And I suspect it maintains a lot of really inefficient processes.
Because, you mean if you're using vendors for different things?
Yeah, like, I'm thinking bookkeeper or an accountant. Every time, I'm sure it's crunch time, they have to file taxes for everyone. We're just going to, like, muscle through it and file the damn taxes, right? It's not like, all right, how can we shave, 10% of time out of this? Right. And there's no incentive to them because everyone pays their bill. Yeah. I've been on the other side of that for sure. And there's just, it's tough and it's a struggle, but yeah, that's very interesting. Like, I think about that for sure in terms of, like, I've talked to, the people who work in my shop, basically, like, through school, no one says, here's your homework, but why don't you spend half that time figuring out a better way to do this homework, or if this homework is even a good idea? Like, who says that, right?
No.
And it's tough because it's really not rewarded at all.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, not to take too much away from our school system, but like school systems were sort of established to produce factory workers and people who could get plugged into a economic machine, not
a particular type of economic machine.
Yeah, a particular type of economic machine,
which is like command and control.
Yeah, and so just driving the point home that it's an uphill battle, even with the most well-intentioned people and like invigorated and excited. Like you have 20 plus years of programming usually to kind of work through before you can make this kind of a daily reality.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's why it's like really frustrating to me when people are like, why are you trying that? Or like, why are you doing that? Even if it fails, because it's sort of like, it's such a, I mean, precious might be overstating it, but it's sort of like a precious thing to protect like people's creativity, I feel like, in a funny way, and like to encourage trying things that don't seem like they maybe should work, because oftentimes like a good solution doesn't work right up front, right? And like you have to try it and then you realize it was a terrible idea, but in trying that thing you realize there's a much simpler version. There's a mathematician who worked on some problem, I'm forgetting his name, I could pull it up, worked on a problem for 10 years and then found the solution to that problem, figured out like the way to solve it, and it took him like 5 minutes, and it was so depressing to him that he jumped off the roof.
Whoa.
Yeah. Which is the wrong conclusion for sure, for a number of reasons. I mean, definitely. But like it took 10 years to figure out that there's a simple solution, right? Sure. And like, yeah, maybe it could have been faster, but also maybe not. And maybe I need to know more about math to figure out why. Maybe it was something really, really, really obvious.
maybe you did do the right thing.
No. But anyway, yeah, interesting.
He was like, 2 + 2 = 4?
How did I not check that? Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's a process. Yeah, well, I'm curious. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, like how to build the culture, how to make sure people know that it is an expectation.
Also an invitation maybe is part of it.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think it's like maybe not quite gaslighting, but if you're sort of like, this is so important, everyone needs to improve, but meanwhile the only metrics anyone ever is measured on is like, are we producing on time? Are we shipping on time? Why aren't you getting these parts done? What's going, if that's the only thing they're ever getting measured on, but every morning meeting you're like, man, it's so important that we improve things. It's sort of like, well, no, it's not. Like you never, I never get in trouble for not improving. Yeah. But I do get in trouble. I mean, in trouble. Like, I don't know who's getting in trouble in either of our shops, but
no one.
Having like a negative interaction rather than a.
I mean, I think it really starts to become clear why so many of these books talk about creating the culture of continuous improvement to be one of the most challenging aspects of this whole process.
Yeah, also the most important, I think. I was talking to someone from one of the big 3 consulting firms. I realized I know someone who works there pretty high up, and was curious about sort of teaching continuous improvement and helping companies.
They were curious?
No, I was curious about how to approach it. 'Cause the funny thing is really what you're trying to get across is like, no one knows the answer. I don't know the answer, but what we do know is that we need to build a culture of like inquiry and continuous investigation and improvement and trying things across the whole organization. And that is the really powerful thing, right? We've talked about this before, but like YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, like those all are user generated content. And that's why they're such a powerful those companies grew.
Yeah.
Because if YouTube tried to make all the content on YouTube, it would be really expensive.
Yeah.
/ impossible. Right. So like in the same way, it is way more powerful if you build an organization of users who are creating content,
Yeah.
right? Every worker in your shop is always improving your company. That's like the most powerful version of this.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a hard sell, because what people want is they want to buy a solution. And I think the entry point to this for me was definitely like having a problem and then reading about a solution.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I can improve my throughput by reducing batch size? What?
Uh-huh.
And then you try it and you're like, oh, that did work. Okay, let me try the next thing. So anyway, I don't know.
Yeah. This is, we're kind of running long for today, but it might be a good point to come back to, which is kind of like what's it called? Not the project leader, but there's like that position at Toyota that's very misunderstood in the West.
Oh yeah, like I forget what the position is called, but like.
Anyway, we should probably come back to that, because I think it's kind of a key point of being like, my impression is that person's job is sort of to like coach a lot of these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of like keep an even keel on continuous improvement and process improvement, and coach people through learning this process sort of from the ground up. And I think that's really key.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe we'll talk about it more next time.
I'm sure.
I think that wraps us up for today. Thank you all for listening. You can find me at Lycan_MFG, and also LycanPrecision.com. I don't really know why we haven't been saying our websites for the past 8 months.
Yeah. And you can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram, or austeremfg.com. And the podcast at Incremental CI on Instagram. And we will be back on Friday.
See you later.